This is The Blaze. Truth lives here. So just to recap, anywhere you need to go, you can take the truth with you by taking The Blaze with you. Find out all the ways at theblaze.com.
The race is on in Iowa anyway. The Blaze Radio's Brad James reports on a big Republican get-together.
It's being called the unofficial kickoff of the 2016 Republican presidential race. 24 Republican politicians, nearly half of them at least considering a run for the White House, are in Des Moines this weekend for the Iowa Freedom Summit, where they'll speak to a sold-out crowd. The summit in its second year hosted by Republican Representative Steve King and Citizens United. Among those attending include Chris Christie, Rick Perry, Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, Ben Carson, and Scott Walker. However, two GOP heavyweights not there, Mitt Romney and former Florida Governor Jeb Bush.
And the Blaze Radio's Tom Peace reporting on America's favorite psychiatrist's take on the Netanyahu controversy.
What's astonishing is how personal and petulant is the administration response, reducing this to a kind of schoolyard brawl.
That's conservative commentator Charles Krauthammer. The Obama administration not happy that House Speaker John Boehner invites the Israeli Prime Minister to address Congress. Netanyahu critical of U.S.-led negotiations aimed at ending Iran's nuclear programs.
They write on their missiles, death to Israel, and they are obviously developing a bomb. So for the Israelis, this is whether the Jewish state will exist and whether another 6 million Jews will be wiped out.
Krauthammer on the Kelly File on Fox News.
Ernie Banks, legendary Chicago Cubs slugger, a man with a smile on his face all the time, synonymous with the city and the team, passing away on Friday at the age of 83. The Chicago Tribune calling Banks one of baseball's most ebullient and optimistic ambassadors. Banks, born in Dallas, began his career in the Negro Leagues as a teenager, beginning his legendary career with the Cubs in 1953. I'm Dave Perkins. This is news on the Blaze Radio Network. Truth lives here.
On a mission given to me by Woody Shaw, Sunship, Dizzy, and John Kahn, dedicated to pursuing a piece of our cultural heritage through interviews with my music heroes, this is The Jake Feinberg Show. Paris Palace at 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. My show revolves around the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage, and the ongoing story of real music made by real artists. Just the way it had to be. Isn't that the old saying, when you look back and ahead in the moment? It's Teddy Edwards blowing some West Coast Southern California hard bop with the melodic percussive vibes of Milt Jackson playing Bag's Groove, keeping time with Ray Brown and the late great Dick Berk. My guest today is from the island of Jamaica, where jazz had come to the forefront because of contributions of Dizzy Gillespie, Bennie Golson, Big Black, Clue J and the Blues Blasters, Aubry Adams, and my guest. He loved it all, pushing the limits and expansion, playing tunes in all the keys until you fell apart and knew what you needed to work on. It could have been supper clubs in upstate New York with Eugene Wright, locking Bag's groove, or eventually becoming a leader of his own, playing natural-born rhythms of Kingston, where the ghosts of Marcus Garvey still look over all of us in the hopes we can appeal to the humanistic side of life. Charity, yes, but more importantly, justice for those who were enslaved and continue to be today. My guest is an international phenomenon, combining his own indigenous music with Brazilian and European classical, blues, funk, soul, and swing. It's all melodic improvisation. He is currently in Florida getting ready for a jam cruise. Montgomery Bernard Alexander, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
I am very pleased to be with you, Jake, and so glad that you will want to have a chat with me about whatever.
Man, it's been a long time. I guess I just would like to start right here, man. Can you just talk about one of the angels on my on this mission with me early on was Dick Berk, and he connected us originally, and I just wanted you to take a little bit of time to talk about your musical personal relationship with Dick.
Wow. Richard Allen Berk, San Francisco. I remember meeting Dick, seeing him play at Birdland. First time I saw him, he was in that group with Harold Vick and Walter Bishop on piano, and I think Eddie Kahn was playing the bass, and there were, who else? I'm not sure, but I got to know Dick more personally not long after that. And this is about 1963. I got a job playing at the Playboy Club. I was one of the opening musicians when they first opened on 59th Street off 5th Avenue. And I had a drumless trio. I was playing there with I remember Bob Cranshaw and Les Pan, among others, guitarist, flautist. They had no drums. And then finally, after a while, they licensed, because they were denied a cabaret license in the beginning. So then finally they got the license, and they could have the trumpets and the trombones and the singers and then the drums. And Kai Winding, who was the musical director at the Playboy, who couldn't yet perform there because, he was one of the finest trombone players, he hired two other musicians to augment the group, and on drums was Dick Berk. So that really started the friendship that we shared. And we had a lot of fun together, and we all had nicknames for each other, and the nickname for me he gave me was Thunderball. Don't ask me why. No, I got it wrong. Goldfinger. It was Goldfinger.
Yeah, it was a James Bond thing, right?
Yeah, it was something to do with the James Bond thing. So I'm Goldfinger, piano playing Goldfinger, I guess.
Yeah,
and
right.
He was Sputnik. We all called him Sputnik in honor of the Russian satellite, if you know what I mean. And we made wonderful friends. In fact, he and I would make an appointment every now and then to meet up at his hotel and go watch F Troop together. We had to see F Troop. We loved Larry Storch and Forrest Tucker and all those guys on that TV show. So that was me and Dick, and we had a lot of fun playing. And then I run into him in California later when Milt and Ray played that date at Shelley's Manhole, and Ray invited Dick to be the drummer, along with Teddy Edwards.
Monty, did you that Playboy gig? Did Larry Willis take over for you? I just remember Gene Bertoncini was. I'm just trying to figure out what amalgamation you were in.
I can tell you the whole thing. Yeah. I started out playing there where Les Pan was the guitarist. Les from Tennessee, who had played with Dizzy, a wonderful guitar player. Loved Wes Montgomery like most guys did. He played with Quincy Jones in Europe. He was there. I was there, and among other bass players, Bob Cranshaw, Jamil Nasser, who was then going by his original name, George Joyner, Major Holly would be playing, and it was a trio. And then later on, Kai Winding, Kay Winding, we had the quartet. It was me on the piano, and wait a minute, I got to back up. After Les departed, Gene Bertensini came.
Right.
And Gene, you're absolutely right, and we had a great time together, Gene and I, with Bob Cranshaw.
Oh, man. What a treat.
And, yep, that's right there for Mr. Hugh Hefner. And that was in, I guess, about 65. We opened the club, and then when I stayed on for a little while to play with Kay's group, just for a couple of weeks, and I had my other opportunities coming at me, Larry Willis, indeed, he became the guy. But before Larry Willis came, Dick departed, and Al Foster became the drummer.
Right.
And that was Al, of course, in the beginnings, and he was just getting going. And, of course, Al stayed in the game and played with Miles and Sonny. I remember Al telling me once, man, I want to be able to play with Miles and Sonny Rollins one day. And sure enough, he did.
You know, we're just talking to such a wonderful cat, Monty Alexander, such a beautiful player. Monty, I'm just trying to phrase this question in my head. Today, we have this saturation of so many musicians, so much stuff out there, and no places to really allow those people. You just talked about all these guys who have identities, who came to the Playboy Club, eventually cut records of their own, became leaders or accompanists. Back in the day, how were you able to be discovered?
My story is just a kid walking down on the road in Kingston, Jamaica, following the sound of that music that I loved, whether it was a calypso band playing folk music, whether it was a little dance combo at one of the hotels where the tourists came in Ocho Rios in Jamaica, or going to some club where they had a jam session with the local Jamaican musicians, people who were just loving the music that came from Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and that whole scene. And I would go, I didn't care what kind of music it was, there I was, and my folks they say, where's Monty? So he's down at some place hanging out, worried about my welfare. But, there was a time where there was safety and everybody welcomed me. I must have been a well-behaved young man, I respected my elders. And it was just my passion, man. I just kept going to where the music was, and I would get to play the piano with these other guys, and I must have been able to light the fire with them or shine somehow. And I did, instead of distracted from what they were doing. So, one foot in front of the other, just because of the love of the music. And, man, you certainly love to be received well, and the applause that goes with it for the little kid who's like 10, 12 years old. That's what I was. And I came to the U.S. in 63, actually, back up. End of 61, very end of 61. I'm 17 years old, and I'm starting to hang out in Miami, Florida, where I was, and the same thing happened. And I go to the various bars, the clubs, and everybody was welcoming to me, and I started getting jobs. Started playing all over. So my whole experience is just the school of life.
Right.
And the street corner was my classroom, because it was about hanging out. And it's not about so much going to learn in a classroom how you play music. No, the music was a result of the joy of the camaraderie you had with these other men that you looked up to, guys who were older than I was. I never was hanging out with my age group, because I thought that, no, I want to be around the guys who knew more than I did, I wanted to, because this is so important. When you talk about, like, Cecil Lloyd, was he your generation? I'm trying to figure out. He was indeed. Yeah. Cecil Lloyd was my generation, and obviously a return to my Jamaican days, and the pianists who made the piano wonderful when you heard it. There were quite a few folks that played piano. A lot of people had a piano in their home who could afford, These days, people want a flat-screen TV. Back then, man, if you could afford it, you want a nice piano, and it was upright, old-time instrument. And there was a lot of piano playing going on in those days. And Cecil Lloyd was a man who had been, I think he had been away and had studied and was classically trained. So he was what you would call fine pianist. And he was well employed at the hotels playing around in Jamaica. So one of the fine players. My favorite guy was Aubry Adams, who you mentioned earlier. Aubry was like a Nat King Cole, Errol Garner disciple, and he was also in the hotels, and he played all the repertoire that I heard at home when my mother and father played their favorite Nat King Cole records. So all these songs I heard Nat King Cole singing and Ella Fitzgerald singing, because we had the records, was Aubry was playing them. And I'd go watch him play for people who weren't, sitting at the edge of the seat listening to a jazz performance. They just wanted to hear nice music, and he'd play rumba, and he'd play the bolero, and he'd play the cha-cha-cha, and he'd play the little soft beat, 2/4 songs, and it was just so tasty. And I would say more than anyone, Aubry was my hero, my mentor, because he just gave a smile and a positive vibration, and I just watch him, So I was stealing everything I could because I loved it so much.
One of the themes of my show is becoming more and more. It's not an L, but it is adversity. And I read somewhere where Aubry couldn't play for a couple of years, and you said that was the most inspiring thing that you ever witnessed. And I was hoping you could talk about that. Why?
Wait a minute, that he couldn't play for a couple of years?
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that you said, I'll have to dig it up, but it was the idea that something was extremely inspiring because, I'll get to it. Let me just read this here. Aubry Adams, who he, meaning Monty, describes as his hero when he was unable to play. He was unable to play the instrument. We're going to have to look at that's on Wikipedia, so we're going to have to do some research on that.
All right, okay.
Anyway, Monty, I wanted to put in a piece of music here for you. Take a listen to it, and then we'll come back and break it down. Okay?
Sounds good. All right, Jake.
Go ahead, brother. Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, sponsored in part by Stereo Hospital, with over 40 years of experience repairing all types of home audio equipment, from vintage table radios to digital surround sound, at 4044 East Speedway inside Metronome Music. It's the place to take your turntable, CD player, tape deck, just about anything has to do with a stereo. Call 722-4610. Check them out. Monty, that was actually not the correct track. I think you're going to get that pretty easily. It was. Do you want to take a guess at that?
The tune we just played?
Mm-hmm.
That was, of course, one of the songs I did on an album I did with Sly and Robbie. People Make the World Go Round. That's what that was.
When did you first meet those cats, Sly and Robbie?
I don't know. A good 30 years ago, I would say. 30 years ago, Sly and Robbie were part of the scene, but it was the later time in Jamaica, because when I left Jamaica, that was the beginning of the whole, what you call, popular Jamaican music outside of that reached outside of Jamaica, because I was a school boy who would sneak out of school and go play on the recording sessions and play rhythm. In fact, a lot of times when Aubry Adams may have been the piano player on those sessions, there I was just getting ready to go at it, and I started playing the rhythm on those songs where they featured local singers that became popular on the scene in Jamaica. And the group that would play, they formed a band outside of the studio, and they called themselves the Scatterlights, and they became quite well known. And so in the beginnings of my adventures in music, one of the things I did was just the joy of playing rhythm, accompaniment. And those guys were very inspired by the rhythm and blues music, especially coming out of New Orleans. I noticed that the way the piano players would play the riff, it was very much like Louis Jordan's band or Bill Doggett. We love Bill Doggett. We love that. So, it all came from that. But Sly and Robbie are the later bunch of guys that came along who are keeping that rhythm spirit alive that comes from what we call mento. Mento is just a Jamaican version of the clave beat that you hear in Cuba and Puerto Rico and Brazil, but there's a Jamaican way, the mento music, and it's the old-time folk music. And even though that's a modern recording, back in 1990-something, 91, 92, the inspiration for those rhythms with Sly and Robbie is mento, the old-time thing. Yeah.
Because this is really the crux of it. Is I talked to another compadre of yours, a collaborator, Larry McDonald, a few weeks ago.
Oh yeah, Larry.
Larry, the man, and he's talking about. I'm thinking, okay, Monty. He said Monty already split for the States before any type of genre or label of reggae came into force. Reggae did not exist when you left, or maybe it did, but it didn't have any names to it. So I guess here's my question. You can go off on this as long as you want, but when you came back, and Bob Marley, Tosh, the list goes on and on. What was that like? Because reggae was not a term when Monty Alexander was discovered as a swing jazz player.
No, there was no name for it. We had the ska. We were talking about the ska, which was the Jamaican style of playing, up-tempo music where, like I said, Louis Jordan was one of the inspirations, and Jamaicans created their own style, their own sound by, let's say, trying to imitate something, but it became more personal the way they were going to play it. So it came after with a whole different vibe. And the names for these types of sounds were musicians in the studio throwing away a little name, and some radio DJ person picked up on a little phrase, and next thing you know, that's how the word started around. I remember Ernest Ranglin, when he was in the studio describing playing part of the beat. When you hear, if I can describe it over the phone, you hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, cha, 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 1, and I heard him say ska, 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 ska. Next thing you know, I hear somebody on the radio saying that's the ska,
Wow.
And then the same with the reggae. A guy saying, yeah man, that beat is a reggae, a reggae, a reggae. And it was a little phrase that some musicians started calling it. Yeah, let's get a singer that rhythm, the one we played last week that had that reggae beat. Next thing you know, it just invaded the world. Maybe that's how the word jazz came about too.
I mean, this is so. This is why I love having you on, man, because I actually believe that it just came from somebody chanting like that, and that's where the name came.
Yeah.
But
it's just a throwaway word that nobody is making any big thing about. Of course, 30 years, 40 years, 60 years, 100 years later, we've intellectualized the whole thing, trying to come up with some highfalutin reason for why that name is there. But it just sort of, hey, that's a name. It's a throwaway, and it stuck because people felt comfortable with it.
I want to. This is so important, Monty. You're an incredibly bright person. I don't know how high a degree you eventually got, but
no degree, brother.
No degree, exactly. I mean, it was a degree in goat, oxtail and goat and nice, swing. But it's
the ropes.
I know, man. Well, I mean, I guess because I don't want to pretend that we're not living through this time, but I mean, there are cats. They're like, they get calls for things, and the people are like, well, we require you to have a master's degree. And for people that are in this system, that are going through academia, learning within the four walls, which is very confining, what would be your advice to younger cats who are really trying to be brave? I had Jimmy Cobb in here in the studio live last week, and he said, when Train was getting his butt kicked by Sonny Rollins every night, and then when he got out and started to just start blowing, people in the audience would get up and say, make him stop, to tell him this. And it's like, what is your advice for, I just want younger, fearless cats like you were to come up with their own sounds. What's your advice? Because the academic part of it is very stifling these days.
Well, if a young musician has that love and that desire and passion, you follow that, and don't let school terms knowledge get in the way of that, because right now it's inviting everybody who wants to play an instrument or be better at it to come to school, join. Hopefully your parents can afford tuition, and you go to the school and you sit there and you hear a guy who knows more than you do tell you how it's supposed to go. Well, there's no supposed to go. There's no way. There's no one way. This thing. My education came from, after I went out of my way to be with these people I so admired and had them looked upon them as the greatest people in the world, these musicians. I looked at them as heroes. I would do my best to shut up and listen and learn how to, if anything, like say, Monty, shut your mouth. Don't say nothing while Mr. So-and-so is talking. And I would just enjoy the company of those people that were my elders. That's whatever I got. That's where it came from. It didn't come from a schoolroom. But I'm not denying the fact that that's how a lot of people who had a gift could hone their craft even more by hearing a learned guy who knows more about harmony and melody, all these complicated things. I didn't come from that. I'm one of these people that just went and wanted to be around the older guys, the elders, sit at the feet of the elders. And the fact that they allowed me in the room with them was the greatest thrill on earth. Just that was it, And I can, you want to remember how so-and-so, what kind of cologne he was wearing, because you smell that cologne and right away you think of, man, that's Ben Webster, or whoever it was. So it was all about humanity and, people. It was just people. In fact, people make the world go around.
Exactly. No, and that's the point. Yeah, and if you just talked about sitting at the feet of the elders, but you're in Miami, and listen. I was born in 1978, so this is so a fantasy for me. And Milt Jackson, please paint the picture of the first time that you met Ray Brown and Milt Jackson, because as far as I'm concerned, they were a gateway for you to get to the West Coast. I'd love you to talk about that. If you remember.
Look, everything is a thread in my life, and I imagine in everybody's life. If you're looking at it that way, sure. And I do, because if I try to plan something, 9 times out of 10 it wouldn't work. I'm going to do this, I'm going to nope, it don't work. So it's circumstance. That phrase, life is what happens while you're trying to make plans, right? That's kind of what happened with me, and I identify that all the way. Now, the thing about Ray Brown, my mother's brother was the spitting image of this guy holding a bass fiddle on the cover of an album I saw when I was about 15 years old. My Uncle Jim was the image of Ray Brown, and when I saw Ray Brown's face on the record, and I heard that boom sound coming out of that bass, looked like the house was shaking, and the rhythm and the swinging feeling that was going on was like enough to make you see the light, so to speak. I said, I got to meet this man. I want to meet this man that looks like Uncle Jim, that plays the bass and every note is the house shaking. I got to meet this man because it was rhythm to the max. It was swinging so hard, and yet there was all that melodic sophistication which I'd heard coming from Errol Garner and from all these other people I loved when I heard him play. And sure enough, my desire to meet Ray worked out, because when I first came to New York, and I had this wonderful serendipity of having met Mr. Jilly Rizzo and Mr. Frank Sinatra, of all people. I mean, the top of the heap. These men saw me playing, and that's how I got to New York. They gave me an airline ticket, and I worked in Jilly's for 3 years off and on. And one night, I was going to tell you this, the bass player, who is one of my dearest friends to this day, big brother, Bob Cranshaw. Bob would talk about his heroes on the bass, and he started talking about Ray. This, Ray, that. And then finally, I saw Ray was playing with Oscar Peterson, New York, at Basin Street East, and I found my way over to the club. And the music was incredible. There was Oscar Peterson tearing up that piano, but the bass player was who I had my eye on, man. I wanted to go meet Ray Brown. And when I met him, I said, Bob Cranshaw told me he was a friend of yours, and so on and so forth. Next thing you know, the man was so warm and friendly towards me, and that was the beginning of a personal friendship. And when he came to New York in the future several times, I would see him, and he and I alone would go hanging out. I remember taking him down to the Half Note to go see his friend Coleman Hawkins. So we're hanging out with Coleman Hawkins. Then I take him uptown to go hang out with Wynton Kelly and Sam Jones, who were playing as a duo in a little club up on the west side. And we just hanging out. Ray hadn't heard me play. So one night when I came to L.A. to play at, of all places, the Playboy Club, this is about 1965, they asked me to go play. They invited me, and that's how I met Les McCann. And Les, our dear friend Les, he's the one that set me up, to go to L.A. So, gosh, I'm talking so much, I'll lose my point.
No, you're doing your. This is amazing. Go ahead.
He's on the Joey Bishop show. And I go by the TV studio to just see Ray again. Hey, man, how you doing, man? And we, on the intermission, we go out and have some ice cream, right? And we're hanging out. And I say, are you playing in town? And he says, yeah, I'm playing at some club, but it's not really a jazz place, but come on down. I said, I leave my name at the door. He said, I'll leave your name at the door. So I go down to see Ray, and I go into this place where all the people there nobody's interested in the music. They're Hollywood, show people and so on. And Ray and the other three musicians were Munda Lowe, Frankie Cap, and the pianist, who, I won't call his name, they had to go play one more tune, and the piano player was at the bar having had one drink too many, okay?
No, I mean, okay, so with Mundell Lowe, and it was Mundell.
Frankie Cap.
And Frankie
right.
Cap, and then a drunk piano player.
That's
okay.
right. That's his Hollywood buddies, right?
Yeah, right.
They're on a break.
Yeah, right.
And he had to go back to just play this one last song to wrap up the night. Nobody's even in the bar listening because the show people in the other room kind of, hanging out. And the piano's sitting there by itself. And they weren't playing. And the piano player with the band, he's at the bar, kind of with his head down on the bar, And I just walked up. I said, "Man, if I play?" He said, "Come on." And I sat at the piano, we start playing some blues, and all I know, Jake, the smoke started rising from the ground. And Ray Brown started hollering all kinds of whoops and hollers because he's having a ball, and we're having we played for 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. And I got up from the piano, and he looked at me and said, "Where are you going to be in July?" That's what he asked me. "So where are you going to be in July?" I said, "Why?" He says, "I want you to come and play with me and Milt Jackson." And that was that.
Well, I mean, that is a perfect segue into the next tune we want to play here for Monty. So settle in, bro, and we'll come back and break it down, okay?
Will do.
All right. Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, sponsored in part by the Amity Foundation Circle Tree Ranch. Since 1981, an internationally acclaimed, dynamic, and innovative teaching community engaged in human services, social, and environmental justice. Located at 10500 East Tankaverde Road, and we appreciate their support. All right, Monty, what do you got for us?
I'm realizing, you get me talking here, like, it's so much to tell, you what's the word? You got my curiosity about my own history as I remember these things, and it's been a wonderful ride, man. I'm having a ball.
Well, no, I want to tell you, I heard Ray screaming. I heard him yelling on that track.
Oh boy, he'd get to yelling when we get going on the bandstand, and that was what I enjoyed with him. He was about having a good time when he played, which is the way I feel. Music is a gift, and somehow it got into my happy place. So when I'm playing, I'm enjoying myself. If I can't enjoy it, then I got to go find something else to do.
I want to, this is really important, Monty. This is just part one, so I don't want you to get worried about it. I want you to talk about a guy who's been under a lot of siege. Who knows what's going to happen to him or his legacy, but you played on these Lost Sessions, 1969, with Bill Cosby and Quincy, and your piano playing on that is about as funky as it can possibly get. You're playing like a Fender Rhodes or something like that. I just wanted you to talk about your interactions with Cos and Quincy and that how that came about. I assume it was just you were connected, but I'd love you to tell me about that.
In fact, while we're on that very gig that you just played the music from at Shelley's Manhole, Bill Cosby would come into the club because they were all friends. Everybody was friends and hung out, and we appreciated each other. And he would come in there and imitate Milt when he would play one of his solos. All those body movements that Milt would make that made everybody scream and holler, because he'd express himself physically. Mm-hmm. And I remember Bill coming in there and picking up the mallets and doing the same thing, and everybody just howling with laughter. Well, then I was invited the following week to be a part of what was going to be the theme song for the Cosby Show at the time, where he played Chet Kincaid, the gym instructor, if you remember that show.
Oh, sure.
And there we were, just in the studio, and Quincy was there directing stuff, and he'd have an idea, but there was no music written out, and you'd play a little phrase, and another guy play a phrase. Next thing you know, there was this track, and there was Cosby in the studio doing his vocal fun and games, and we're just laughing the whole time, And every now and then we went into some tune, and I swear I just forgot about that whole thing. Years and years go by, and I used to tell my friends, "Oh yeah, I played on the track." I was on. In fact, Joe Sample and myself, we played some keyboard stuff on that. Paul Humphrey on drums, and various other people. Carol Kay on the Fender bass, and it was just a nice event, and that was that. And years and years go by, and they released an album of the music when they recalling what had happened, and that's all I can tell you. But it was all good times.
What is your gig? Where are you about to leave to? Is it a jam cruise of some sort?
It's called the Jazz Cruise. Mm-hmm. It's on one of the Holland American lines, and it's called the Eurodam. And I understand it's into about the 25th year, if not longer, of the Jazz Cruise, which became a really desirable phenomena for jazz lovers, especially the retired crowd of people who love their music a certain way. And it sails out of Fort Lauderdale, where I am right now, and it goes, believe it or not, the first stop being tomorrow or day after tomorrow is Falmouth, Jamaica.
Oh,
I'm actually going to go to my Jamaica, and I'm kind of happy about that. And then we play on the boat, and I'm going to have my ensemble, which I've called Harlem Kingston Express, which is a group of musicians where my players who are about jazz music as we love it, but combined with a reggae rhythm section. So there are two drummers, two bass players, and me and a guitar player, and it comes together like Monty Alexander's life. My love of the straight ahead, my love of the one drop, and it's all in there, and we just celebrate the whole experience, crazy as it sounds, and it's just something everybody's enjoying, you know. And I'm going to play another set with my compadres of a long time ago, going back to when Ray Brown introduced me to Mr. John Clayton and Mr. Jeff Hamilton. So there's John Clayton, Jeff Hamilton, and myself. We play a trio set. But enough of me. There's Joey DeFrancesco is on the cruise. There is Houston Person is on the cruise. Phil Woods is on the cruise. There's a bunch of incredible artists, and we're all happy to see one another because, as you know, we're a bunch of friends at the end of the day. You know, it's a community of everybody saying, hey, man, how you doing? Everything is great. Good to see you. You sound great, you know, and that type of thing. So it's a fun thing for 6 days as we sail the Caribbean Sea.
Monty, one final question and it is, what a trip. You were discovered by the Masters. Most of them were black. You know, you obviously have had a prolific career, but you did a lot of work on the MPS label, which is a European label.
Yeah.
You know, I guess what I'm getting at is this art form known as melodic improvisation. Some people call it jazz. How come it has always been more popular outside of the United States?
Well, it's like talking about fine wine. People have to go to their way to go get the fine wine. You know, you can get the wine that's like on the counter. You know, give me a bottle of that whatever it is, and it's $5. You know, give me that. Mm-hmm. They get a buzz. They drink it. But the people who had that wonderful happening in their lives, where when they heard these sounds that were other than, it did something to them inside. You don't see it on the front shelf. You got to go back behind the counter to find it and go to your way. And in America, there is a culture of laziness where people don't really have the opportunity. I mean, they don't go out of their way to see, I mean, in the larger population, because radio is coming at them, playing the popular music, the easy to listen to music, the whatever you want to call it. And jazz, as you know, is this very rarely heard thing. And so Americans are not brought up to appreciate the excellence of this American gift to the world. When you go to France, you go to Germany, you go to Switzerland, there is a much larger group of people over in that world that understand that this is something excellent, and it's also something to enjoy. So a guy like myself can go play in front of 2,000 people in Zurich, Switzerland, and they paid a pretty good ticket price to come and hear the music because it means something to them. And that's a common thing in Europe and in Japan. It happens in New York, it might happen in LA, it happens in the big cities in America, but in general, it's just not on the front counter. Like the other wine.
So it's about digging deep. A lot of people say that, you know, on this excavation, I've been in the sewers pulling out all these unsung cats, but I look at it as more being in some sort of wine cellar and finding that just the jewels. And Monty Alexander is one of these living jewels. And when you get back in and you get both feet back on the ground, Monty, let's make sure we can pick this up again, do part 2, because there's a lot more to cover, my friend.
Well, there's a whole lot, and I just want to say thank you for what you're doing, because I'm aware of this archiving and talking to guys who most no one is aware of how valuable they are. I mean, thank you for including me in that bunch, but I really want to say thanks for what you're doing, Jake, and I hope we can have another chat because I really enjoyed it, and you're a responsive receiver, brother.
Oh, thank you, brother. Much love to you, man, and have a great cruise, all right? I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We'll be right back.